everybody. I don't know if everyone is aware how this day has come to be. And I want to just give a brief explanation about all this and how I know Frank Dunn. About 6 years ago, I began my doctoral program at Virginia Seminary. And lo and behold, one of the adjunct professors was Frank Dunn, who I was a part of his small groups when we would do case studies. So that's initially how I got to know Frank Dunn back then. A force to be reckoned with. A very helpful force at that time. I think both of us have our doctorates in congregational development and helping congregations to grow and mature in faith in healthy ways. I think yours was more on mutual ministry and working with clergy laity, is that right?
Actually, I did my focus on the dissertation was called Practicing Priesthood in a Non-Hierarchical Community, because I had the fortune too after this one of landing in a place which didn't have a rector because they didn't want a rector because they'd had two they had to fire, and they figured, well, we don't need to go down that thing again, so they got a senior priest and worked out a new leadership model that was pretty inventive and creative, if not portable. You know, I don't know that you could try that everywhere, but anyway, that's what the mine was about.
And then mine focusing on trauma and recovery in a parish, mostly focused on clergy misconduct, unfortunately, but helping parishes to deal with conflict, to heal, to become whole, unify, and move forward. So that's our initial meeting was at Virginia Seminary. And then when I knew that I was being appointed as priest in charge here at Trinity, I'm not really sure how I found out, but I knew that you had been rector here. So you and I met for lunch before we moved up here to Connecticut back in February. And then Joan Rock died. And I had taken a walk one morning down Main Street and been so touched by just the name Thankful House. And I think through Facebook then, as I posted about Thankful House, and then I understood that Joan Rock had lived in Thankful House, and that Jill called and said, my mom's final wishes are that her ashes be interred here at Trinity Church in the Memorial Garden. Are you okay with that? Yes. And then I find out Frank has been longtime family members. So it kind of all just morphed into how this day could come to be. So really, who I want to thank is Joan Rock. I think she and her legacy here, her commitment to being here for many, many years is really why we're here this morning. But as I reflected back, I've been here 6 months as the priest here at Trinity Church. Still a lot to learn, piecing together parts of our history, parts of the ways in which we are called to move forward in healthy ways. That's why I want to enter into this conversation with Frank just briefly before we make our way at 11:30 down to the Memorial Garden. So I asked Frank to be thinking about two questions. What was your greatest challenge here at Trinity, and what was your greatest blessing? Greatest challenge, greatest blessing.
Greatest challenge. I decided I would just actually speak the truth instead of making something up. The greatest challenge I had externally was that I followed someone here who was very popular. Steve Goucher was the rector here for 8 or so years. And Steve really is the one to whom you and I owe an enormous debt for the work he did in for example, renewing liturgical life in this place. And those of you who are around, and there's some of you here who were, will bear me out on that. Steve did an absolutely fabulous job in the 1970s of introducing people to what was then the New Prayer Book. And he did that in such a way that when I came, I inherited this marvelous liturgical space and all the stuff that had been done. Margaret Warner was a part of that renewal movement, and she and Steve were quite a team. I came and Jim Kowalski was a curate. And the thing is, I had followed someone. I'd only been rector of one parish, and I followed someone who was not particularly popular, and I thought that people thought that I hung the moon for the first year or two I was here. And it's, when you're 29 years old, you think you can hang the moon. Everybody's saying, well, yeah, sure. And you find out if you've got any sense that no, that's not all about you, and so on and so forth. But I left with a good feeling about what had happened in that place, and so on and so forth. And I came here, and I spent the first 3, 4, 5 years kind of getting my sea legs. And learning, ministry is not about personality. It really is not. It's got something to do with it, but it really is about relationships. It really is about relationships. And, and staying in relationships even when it's difficult and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, I could go on, and I'm not going to take the airtime to say the biggest challenge for me was an internal challenge, was learning that, I wasn't a hot shot. That's the honest God truth. And there were many things, over the years, I could sum it up in one word: personnel. The comings and goings of curates, and some relationships worked out, some were very difficult. The comings and goings of church staff and so on. For the most part, we had an absolutely fabulous staff for most of that time. But there were times, and you bear me out on this, there were times when I just didn't know how to do the relationship thing well, and I thought I did. So anyway, that was my biggest joy. The biggest joy, gosh, there was a lot of forgiveness in this place. There really, really was affirmation and so on and so forth, and people were genuine. And I left here much, much stronger for having been a part of a community that actually got it, and really kind of knew what the gospel was. And I've never stopped giving thanks for that.
So you want to know what my greatest challenge and blessing and joy is? I think my greatest challenge is managing the expectations, or trying to manage the expectations of what you left and what Kathy has left, and this notion that we had to have all of this stuff and all of the people that were here in the past to really be Trinity Church. So I think some of that, and we have gone through a good bit of change and transitioning, and I'm here to help with that. But the expectation is, well, we're not Trinity Church unless that choir loft is full, unless our youth program has 50 or more kids in it. And it did during your time. I think in the heyday, some of the time. So one of the things that Frank and I have talked about a little bit has just been the ebb and flow naturally that occurs in the life of a parish. And so I don't think we're in the depths by any stretch of the imagination, but I think we are in flux, there is some transition, some moving in and out, and moving forward as well. The greatest blessing is are the people who are here. And I mean Trinity Church people, but I also mean Newtown people. We are so blessed to live in the rectory here on Main Street, at 64 Main Street. And before we even met some of you, we were meeting our neighbors. Our dog helps because we're out walking Ruby a lot. And there are many others in Newtown Main Street who walk their dogs. So we've had an opportunity to introduce ourselves, or people would come up. Herb was one of those, and introduced himself. Neighbors across the street, neighbors next door. So the friendliness and openness, which totally was not the expectation moving here, because I was warned in Arlington, Virginia, that people in Connecticut are really hard to get to know. They're New Englanders, they're Yankees, they're not going to be open and friendly, and that certainly has not been the case at all. So that's been and continues to be my great joy and my great blessing serving here at Trinity and being part of the Newtown community. I'm wondering if you might have questions for Frank and myself. We have about 10 minutes. We didn't plan a program for you. Yeah, Kurt.
Not so much a question, but just a positive note to pass along to Frank and his partner. A few years after you had left, we did a church youth work camp trip down to South Carolina. And on the route back, Larry contacted Frank, and Frank said, come on and stop and see us at Lynchburg. Well, we had like 40 youth, 7 vans. I mean, this was a real road show. And Frank made arrangements for us at a local school. Your daughter ran school. We stayed over. But the amazing thing about it, I've never seen 40 kids want to surround somebody. And they really did with you, Frank. It was like you were the Pied Piper. They were so happy to see you after many years. You know? So, you know, your legacy has continued here.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I remember that visit. I don't remember the adulation. I'm glad you do. That's a wonderful memory. I'll have to keep it alive.
Other questions, thoughts, comments? Yeah.
I was going to ask Frank about this later, but I'll ask you now. I think it was you. Did you, at one time when you were here, when your girls were playing sports, did you write an article about being on the sports field and listening to the coaches and the parents and everything tell these little kids, get them, cut them off, grab it, you know, all these kinds of things. And the article was about how everything they heard on the sports field was so contrary to what we were teaching them at Trinity.
Well, I'll certainly take credit for that.
It was a very interesting observation.
Well, you know, two things about that you bring it up, and this may be sidetracking something quickly. Barbara Dunn, my wife, when I was here, did something for me that I have absolutely, it changed my life, really. She went through my calendar one fall and wrote down all of Ann's soccer games on it. And she said, I know if I don't get this on your calendar, you probably won't make many of them. And she was exactly right. Because one of the things that I didn't know at the time, but I now know, was I was a workaholic of the worst sort during much of the 80s when I was here, as indeed most people are, I think, honest to God, in you know, the 40s and early 50s and so on and so forth. We're all trying to win and achieve. All
We
that kind
still
of
are.
Yeah. and as a result of that, I was given a gift that I would take nothing for, and that was being out on that sports field, where I probably did see that I would have missed entirely. And I did write articles in those days, and that was one of the things. And I remember one day when my kid got the wind of something knocked out of her, and I was glad I was there. You know, it was nothing major, but yeah, I would say that, you know, the gospel's practiced more on the soccer field, whether or not the coaches are saying things that are antithetical to Jesus, you know, than frequently it is in the church. So, thank you for remembering that.
Amy.
I was hoping you could take a minute to remind us of how much vitality Trinity brought to the community during the 80s and the 90s, things like that were started as a result of Trinity parishioners getting out and being significantly involved in the community.
Well, I think
Family
you still,
life, even Trinity Day School.
I think you still do, and those were great years. When I came here,
Did you start Trinity Day School while you were here? Was that
no,
started?
Lord, no. Trinity Day School had been in operation for a long, long time. I think that was started back when Ed Cook was a rector here, I think.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was still going on, you know, quite very much. The big issue, the systemic issue, was of money, and I don't know whether that's still the issue or not. And I don't mean just. But it was a huge thing because, long story real short, Curtis Glover had died, left the church $1 million, and now I think it's worth God knows how many. But that was a huge thing in the 1950s. And Ed Cook was a rector at the time, and as one of the things that is a result of that bequest was the putting on of this parish house. And Ed did a fabulous job. I never knew him. We met, but before he tragically was killed. Never knew him much. But the story was quite alive. That Ed had really put himself on the line to get the parish involved with interracial relationships and some other creative stuff, and so on. So people were kind of saying, we really ought not to be spending all this money on ourselves, and so there was kind of a inside-outside thing going on, and a lot of competition and so on. And out of that stew came a couple of things. One was the Family Life Center. Bob Walker, whom I mentioned in the sermon this morning, was quite instrumental in among a lot of folks in getting that going. Is that still
Where's
going?
that?
The Family Life Center?
It merged with youth service.
Yeah, youth services had begun on Jim Kowalski's watch before I got here, and Newtown, yeah. So anyway, that was thing number one. Thing number two was, again, a part of a long story, but it's got a point. It was back during the Reagan years, and the end of a huge amount of mental hospitalization had been abruptly declared, if you recall, and people were out on the streets who were homeless, and that's actually the origin of the massive homelessness problem that we've experienced ever since. We had some, but nothing like began to emerge. So after a few years of shelter work in Danbury, Mike Coburn and Ann, who were then the co-rectors of St. James Danbury, talked to a number of us and said, you know, we really ought to do something that's beyond just the shelter thing. And out of that came Amos House, which was a transitional facility for housing. Nancy Gosling, who's now a priest and retired from this diocese, hasn't she? She's in Massachusetts now.
Yeah.
Nancy was the then chair of the outreach committee, and Trinity really got involved in a major way. And this is my story about that, which is a personal one. I had an EFM group, and Nancy was in it, and one night we met after the big celebration of the opening of Amos House, and I'd gone to that, and I sat there feeling bad the entire time, because everybody got up and talked about how much had been poured in by Mike Coburn, and how you know, other clergy around and lay people and so on had helped. And I thought, you know, I haven't really done anything much. You know, I haven't been over here planting marigolds and you know, wallpapering and all this kind of stuff like that. And I've been out on the soccer field or someplace. And so I told the EFM group that you know, I really, really regretted that this marvelous thing had happened, and I felt so little a part of it. And Nancy Gosling said, this sounds self-serving, but that's not my point. Nancy Gosling says, but you did. And I said, well, how? And she said, well, don't you realize why all the others of us were over there? We were over there because you kept telling us that that's what the gospel was. Excuse my choking up about this. That was the first time I'd ever put together that my ministry was not wallpapering or planting marigolds or keeping up with, you know, doing the hands-on stuff. That there was another kind of role. And it was the most freeing thing I think anybody probably ever said to me about ministry. Thank you, Nancy, wherever you are.
Let me jump in here, because my very first day on the job here at Trinity Church was a breakfast for congregations who had been part of establishing Amos House. So I was invited to go with several here from Trinity to the breakfast. We're sitting there, round tables, the room is packed to celebrate this 30-year anniversary. So whoever, I can't even remember the official name that was leading it, he said, would anybody from the churches like to come and say a word? Well, I pointed to Mark Benedict, who was part of our mission outreach. He said, no, you go up. I'm like, I just got here. So I go up, and there are other clergy. Joseph is there from St. James, and somebody from St. Stephen's is there. Whitney's there from Ridgefield. So the guy says to the four of us clergy, would someone like to say a word to everybody? They don't say anything, so I say, well, I will. I don't know a thing about any of this, but I do begin to speak and thank the people and recognize that although I had nothing to do with it, so you started, I didn't know this till you just said it now, you started it, I got to say thank you on behalf of Trinity Church, and you planted the seeds. I'm reaping the benefit of it, of saying on behalf of Trinity Church. I just think it's amazing. I did absolutely nothing with it. But that's how the gospel is. We are not,
Yeah.
we are expected to continue it on. And to proclaim God's love in these amazing ways of reaching out to others. But what a blessing for me, my very first day here at Trinity, to represent you all, to represent the legacy, the history of Trinity's commitment to helping the homeless, to helping those in need right here. You want this back?
Yeah, I did. Well, you hold it, I did not start Amos House. Mike Coburn is the one who had the brilliant idea. All I said was,
But you didn't say, no, we can't do that. We've never done that before.
No, I didn't.
All right, we got one more. Jeff.
Frank, you used to love to play the piano. Now, what are you doing for fun in your life now?
Well, Joe, y'all haven't met my husband. Joe and I were married in 2011, and he knows way the deuce more theology than I'll ever be able to retrieve. Stand up and take a bow. Now, what did I get into that? The piano, yeah. Joe and I played a duet the other day, a recorder and piano and so on. So the first time I touched the keyboard in longer than I'd like to admit. So we enjoy that. What am I doing for fun? Painting. Haven't done much of that this year, but I did a fair amount last year. I took an art course. First one I'd ever had in drawing. I ran many years, including while I was here. I tapered off from that and began weight training and so on. So, I became a gym rat sometime in 1998. and that sustains me a lot. We enjoy travel, have done some great trips. And there are a lot of other things, but that'll serve.
Anything else?
Did you do anything more, when you were here, you started to get into acting? And I thought that might be a sort of secondary calling.
The phrase that I enjoy people saying most is, "You missed your calling." You should have been an actor. And so, no, I haven't really done any acting except what comes naturally.
On that note, you married me in 1983. When did you first arrive? What was your date?
1979.
Okay, so what a showman, for a young bride, and, the way you just made everything work, and, the music, and, the rehearsals, and I don't know how many other people were married here by Frank. Anybody married here by Frank? So
Laura
it was
Earl,
like
yeah.
Unbelievable. You felt like you were in such good hands. You had complete control of the event. So I just wanted to say how much I appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
There are a lot of baptisms, too.
Marriages and baptisms. I remember baptizing one of yours on a Pentecost day when it was hotter than flame.
Yeah, it's hard.
It was Scott, wasn't it?
It was Scott.
I believe it was
Yes.
Scott.
Yes.
Pretty good.
So there is a story I heard about a baptism that you did, and it just touched my heart. I really do think it speaks to your pastoral ministry here, that someone had called and needed a baptism really quickly, and you agreed only in the context of a worship service, and the healing service happened to be that evening. So you prepared that person for the baptism of her child, and unbeknownst to those who were coming for what they thought was a healing service, you said, "We're going to have a baptism tonight." And I so appreciated that spontaneity, that pastoral care, meeting that urgent need in that moment, and inviting others to be a part of it. So it wasn't something, well, I'll just do a private baptism. But no, we will all share in this together. I'm sure there are many, many other stories with that kind of heart and compassion and care for the others. I know that we are continuing that through Kathy's tenure here and through my time with you here as well. I'm aware of our time, and I think there may be some others from the community coming to join us in the memorial garden for the interment of your mom's ashes. So I'm going to conclude our time here with just a brief prayer of thanksgiving, And then those of you who would like, please join us in the Memorial Garden. We're going to go out the door here and then make our way down the parking lot to gather out there for a brief time of the committal and service there. So thank you everyone for being here. It's just been a wonderful morning, and thank you Joe for coming and being part of it as well. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Holy and gracious God, in this sacred space of our community room, sacred space of this church, and now to the place where we will go to place the remains of Joan, a beloved member of this parish who served you faithfully here. May her memory and her presence here not be forgotten, but encourage us as those who are continuing on this faith journey to commit to loving one another, loving you through ministry in this place, through reaching out beyond these doors into our community in bold ways, in loving ways, in compassionate ways. Thank you for each person that is here right at this moment and the ways that you've blessed our hearts and our spirits this morning and this time of being together in worship and this time of fellowship. Thank you for Frank, for his many years of ministry here and beyond. Now, gracious God, we pray that you will use each of us as you will and always to the welfare of your people. We pray these prayers in the name of Jesus. Amen.
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 Thank you.
Thank you all.